haven't even got a creative intro on this one because the title speaks for itself.
Everything is crooked. I hate this. Weird.
Welcome to episode 478 of Motorsport 101. I am your friendly neighborhood host, Dre Harrison. Joining me, as ever, is Cam Buckley, as mentioned in our last show. Just me and him on this occasion. RJ is at Petit Le Mans as we speak.
He's busy walking road Atlanta, the lucky bastard.
I know. He's so lucky for it. He's just left us to talk about the state of bike racing at the moment because it's a fascinating time for all the right and wrong reasons because, well, we're going to cut to the chase on this one. Marc Marquez it's official. We now it's kind of amazing that we kind of knew this was going to be the inevitable end of how this story was going to play out, but it didn't make it any less shocking when the press release finally came out.
No, you could see the press release coming from months away, and it still hit like a ton of bricks when it finally dropped. Right. And we still haven't even gotten confirmation of where he's going to go. We all kind of know where he's going to go.
Of course.
But, you know.
Yeah, it's not ideal at all. I mean, we all know it's Gresini, but we just can't say it yet. And we're getting in towards...
We just did.
I mean, whoops, my bad. God, what a leak. Poor journalism, Dre. No, but I'm trying to think of the best way. We're going to get straight into this here. Well, I'll do the social media stuff at the end of the show, but this is a straight-in, warranted sort of discussion.
I mean, I guess we can start off with some of the numbers, the hard numbers. 11 years in the top flight. 6 World Riders Championships, 59 Grand Prix wins together, but no more. Marc Marquez will depart Repsol Honda a year early on his contract at the end of the 2023 season. What the hell?
You lowballed some of those numbers. We didn't even mention 101 podium finishes, like 64.
Added to that. You just added to that this weekend.
Yeah, you finished third in Japan. 101 podium finishes, 64 pole positions, the most of anyone in top flight history. Just, again, I could own, before I get into this, we are talking about, for me, the motorsport talent of the century. I have never, and I do mean ever, have seen anything like Marc Marquez on a motorcycle ever.
We talked at length in the Formula One episode, right, about the gladiatorial nature of motorsport. Well, no one embodies that, for better and for worse, than Marc Marquez, because we have seen him do things on a motorcycle that beg our belief, where you have to rewatch the replay 5 or 6 times. Did he save that?
Yeah.
He stayed on the bike. Oh, he kept going. Oh, he's still winning the race. Okay, cool. I mean, on raw ability and talent, the most absurd individual I have ever seen in motorsport.
There has never been, and he's Usain Bolt in biking form. We have never seen. There's a great clip when he runs that famous 9.58 world record in Berlin, not the 9.69 in Beijing where he was beating his chest 15 meters out from the line. The 9.58, which is the current modern day world record he set in Berlin a year later. I think it's Paul Dickinson is his name, the great athletics commentator in the UK that's been doing this for 30 plus years on the BBC, and he said, I've never seen anything like this, and I am unlikely to ever again. And that's...
As far as Marc Marquez, that was simply weekly.
Yes.
Until about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Every week it was, so what kind of crazy shit is he going to pull off this weekend?
Yeah.
And for better and for worse, that is what has defined him. Since before he arrived in the top flight. I mean, he was rewriting the rules on how to ride a motorcycle back in Moto 2.
Yeah. But when he came from the back of the grid to win his 10th race of the year as a 125cc rider, as a 16-year-old, Toby Moody, one of the great commentators in MotoGP history, said himself he knew that kid was special the moment he saw that race. He knew he was going to be a future world champion. And he was. And we lowballed it. He's become one of the greatest riders we've ever seen. Like we could talk for an hour alone on the ridiculousness of Marc Marquez. And there is a reason why he is the biggest name this sport has had since Valentino. There is a reason why why
we gush about him every time we get to talk about him on this podcast, because he is the rider that more than anyone else is willing to go jump out into the unknown and discover what others are not willing to. This is the reason why on a bike that does not work, has not worked well since 2015, he racked up 59 wins.
More than
Mick Doohan. Man, they should retire that number one. I mean, Mick Doohan really owned that thing in the 90s.
He's had a better top flight career than Mick Doohan. Arguably the greatest ever. Many people think he is the greatest ever. And there's an argument.
The guy who made the 500cc class irrelevant in the 90s because they just thought, oh, no one else is very good. No, it's just because Mick Doohan was beating everyone's ass so bad until his final career-ending injury.
Yeah. The question I put in the script here was, what does this mean for Marc, for Honda, for Gresini, and for the sport at large? I'll tell you what it means for the sport at large. The sport just won. The sport got its wish. Like, nobody won with Marquez on a uncompetitive Repsol Honda, and let's be real, even before his horror arm break and the saga that's come with it since, he was papering over the cracks of a Honda team that was already in decline and in free fall.
They paid the price of complacency. I mean, from 2015 onwards, the bike deteriorated. And there was a couple seasons where it was a little bit better, but generally speaking, it was a bike that only worked on its front end, had no rear grip. And by 2019, more COVID. By 2019, Honda's solution was to stick the most powerful engine they could possibly muster into the existing bike, compromise everything about the bike besides its strong front end, and then say, well, Marc, you are the greatest rider on the planet. You need to deal with what this does to the bike.
Yeah.
And there were issues in 15 and 16. 17 and 18 were a little better. 19 is where it became very clear that Marquez is the only person who can ride this bike. This bike broke Jorge Lorenzo.
Another
five-time world champion.
Another arguable top 5 rider of all time. A monster of a rider.
And how quickly we forget, but 2020's preseason for Honda was an unmitigated disaster. They put that bike out there with all new aerodynamics for 2020, and it didn't work at all. There was no way to get the performance out of it. And indeed, they got no performance out of it until Marc and Honda took the executive decision to bin their entire aerodynamic philosophy for 2020 and go back to the 2019 fairing. And that's about as good as it got from there.
We know the story.
We know he broke his arm.
We've talked about it from there at length. We know how the story ends from here. And like I said, the sport wins. Like Marc Marquez will be on a competitive motorcycle for the first time in half a decade, if not more, next year. And
let's be real. His raw, unfettered ability is the reason why Andrea Dovizioso didn't win at least 3 championships on a Desmos Sedici that by 2017 had begun to evolve into the best
juggernaut
bike in the field.
Yeah.
Still had problems, and really it still had problems until really 21. But the upside of that bike was tremendous. And as the old adage goes, if you can't beat them,
join them.
Eventually you join them. And I find it very funny that Ducati's management, their racing management, is like, we don't need Marquez. And then Ducati's CEO is like, crack? Is that what you guys smoke down there? You smoke crack? Sign that man.
Here's a blank check. Go sign Marc Marquez. And let's not forget, and if anyone has any illusions about how badly Marc Marquez wants to win, he is, from what I've been told on good authority, he is leaving 18 million euros on the table to leave this team early. For him, it's not...
He just quit the biggest contract in motorcycle racing history.
Yeah, it was over $100 million. Now, apparently, the signing bonus was 8 figures.
The signing bonus!
He's walking away from 18 million euros to join Gresini on a cut price deal, likely with Red Bull probably slipping a check in there to help him out. But by any measure,
and this is unprecedented. No one has left a factory to do an effective downgrade of this type.
No.
Even when Valentino walked from Repsol to go to Yamaha, Yamaha gave him the keys to the entire kingdom.
Bring whatever you want.
Bring whoever you want.
Pay you whatever you want.
And we're already making major changes to the 04 bike. You define the direction. We will build what you want. I'd say it worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah, brought over. They gave Jeremy Burgess the keys to the castle, and they won immediately.
Yeah. In this case, Marc is coming over with no one, and for one season on a satellite year-old, what will be a GP23, the bike that is almost certain to take home this year's championship on account of the fact that Marco Bezzecchi just shattered his collarbone. I mean, equipment aside, because the equipment is the obvious thing here, a year-old Ducati is still, I mean, in some cases, it's better than the current bike because Ducati has not always stepped forward with the development of their bikes since they've hit their heights in this recent era. But to walk away from that much money, to walk away from Honda, not out of frustration with their management, not out of another opportunity with another factory, but out of the frustration that their bike is simply unsalvageable. This has never happened.
He walked away in tears. The same day that he announced he was leaving, he was in tears announcing his decision because he really did not want to do this. He gave them every chance to give him something for the future.
He gave them Dre, the reason why I brought up that 2020 preseason, Honda are still there. They still can't make aerodynamics work. They still can't get the back of the bike to grip. And worse still, when Paul Espargaro and Stefan Bradl and Taka Nakagami defined the direction of the current RC213V, going into 22, they redesigned much of this bike, all of the aero, much of the frame, swing arm, the works. And in doing so, they fixed none of the problems, but they took away the one masterpiece of the Honda, which was its front end, the ability to manipulate the front tire. And in trying to make a bike that everyone can ride, they've made a bike that no one can ride, that does not respond to development. And did you watch All In on Amazon Prime?
I watched bits and pieces of it. I never actually finished it, funnily enough.
When Marc Marquez points to the massive gash in his arm,
I did see this
from the surgery, from the final surgery to re-break his arm, which had rotated 33 degrees out of rotation.
He had to go to the he had to go to the Mayo Clinic to get that fixed. That's the last resort.
Surgery number 4.
The fourth surgery, you have to go to the Mayo Clinic, which is the #1 private practice, arguably in the world, knowing that if this didn't work, he'd have to retire.
And all stemming from the fact that in 2020, no one at Honda stopped him when he got back on that bike. Look, motorcycle riders, you need to stop them. If they think they can ride, they're going to ride. Marco Bezzecchi just had his collarbone bolted back together. He's going to try and race this weekend. We'll see what happens. Alex Rins tried to get back on a bike after destroying his leg and had to have the proof in the pudding that he could not ride. Honda didn't stop Marc Marquez in 2020 because they knew he was their crutch. He is the only thing making that bike work. They are still there in 2020, unable to make this bike work. He gave him 2 years.
Arguably 3.
4 of his prime.
He was 20. He was 26 years old when he signed that contract. He was entering his prime.
He's lost 4 years of his direct prime. And don't get me wrong, a lot of it is self-inflicted.
Sure.
But Honda had the ability to stop and say, hey, rather than 5 days, take a month off. He still probably could have won that world title in 2020, given how much of a shit show it was.
2020 was a mess. The world champion won 1 race. Nobody won more than 3.
How's that current world champion doing on the Honda?
Injured.
Permanently. So to walk away from Honda, to walk away from all of this, to get on little Gresini. I love how Matt Oxley put it on Twitter. Fausto's probably upstairs going, God, look, Marc Marquez just signed for my team. I'm paraphrasing, but pretty much.
It was like, holy shit. I was like, yeah, like, Fausto Gresini, God rest his soul, is probably grinning like a Cheshire cat up in heaven, knowing that the Marquez brothers, you've got 2 world champions riding for you, 2 multiple-time world champions riding for your team. That's crazy.
You think that wasn't an influence as well? What do you think? What do you think Alex and Mark talk about over dinner?
Oh, how good's your Duke? Like, no shit. Like, Alex Marquez, who's having his best MotoGP season of his career so far on a Ducati.
It ain't close.
And it ain't even close compared to what he was doing on a Honda. Like, come on now. I mean, let's not play dumb here. This is a huge, like, honestly, I can't believe I'm saying this because this is to back to my original question. Everybody wins in this. The sport gets a marketer's wet dream in a Gresini team. Think about how many Palmer Violets are going to be on the grid next year with the Marquez brothers being teammates in the same camp. Ducati have just snagged, at least for a 1-year rental, they now have arguably the 2 best riders in the world, maybe even 3
I think they have
camp.
3 of the 4. I think they have 4 of the 5.
Yeah. Their lineup is now somehow even stronger than what it was already. Like Gresini, how many blue jackets are you going to see in the crowd next year? A bucket load.
Whole lot less orange.
Whole lot less orange. No, Marquez gets his freedom. You could see the relief on his face when he signed and announced that deal.
Well, and he said it as well. And again, it's not confirmed he's going to Gresini, but he's going to Gresini. It's the only spot. The thing that struck me in the chest reading that his statement is that I can't keep doing this if I can't love riding a motorcycle. It's Calvin John. It's Megatron.
Yeah.
It's that the Honda is so bad. The situation is so bad there. It's killing his love of motorcycle riding.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see it at the Saxon Ring. Marc Marquez is still, in a technical sense, undefeated at the Saxon Ring. But only because he bent that bike into enough knots this year, flipping it off as the bike refused to comply. He injured himself 5 times that weekend. Trying to force something that was just never going to work.
6. He was 6.
He crashed
crashes.
6. Broke multiple ribs.
Yeah, the warm up was 1 too many. That was the 6th crash he'd had that weekend. He had 3 in qualifying alone.
I think that was it. I think that was the final inflection point.
Absolutely.
You could see it in his body language that he was at, and Marc Marquez is beyond 100%. He was beyond 120%.
He lives beyond that line.
That's why he is who he is. And the bike simply stood. The bike dug its heels in and refused. And I think that was it. And then it was just a question of getting out of the contract. And again, the only reason he can get out of this contract is because he's going to a satellite team.
Unreal. All of this just feels so unreal. And look, I said it in my notes, and to wrap up this little segment in a bow, I don't think there's a loser in this scenario. Maybe Honda to a degree, but even then, I think this rebuild could actually do them some good, in the sense of they actually now no longer have the pressure of having to rebuild their factory, of also having to appease to their star rider and the relationship that they had with him. Yes, it's going to suck that they have lost to Marc Marquez, of course it will, but they've needed a rebuild for some time, and the shock value of losing the best thing they've ever had as a rider should take some of the pressure off them to help commit to this rebuild. And if it's true they're going to bring up Johan Zarco, which they might do there, but there's rumors they're going after Miguel Oliveira as well, which would be a very, very interesting hire if they did. But if they promote... Johan Zarco is one of the most experienced riders in MotoGP. He's an excellent developmental rider. He's done very good work on poor machinery many a time in his career.
Ridden a little bit of everything at this point.
Yeah, he's the only guy in the field that's ridden for 4 different factories. No one else in the field has. He's a very
the problem is, Dre,
yeah, but go on.
Is that I think the other inflection point here, I don't think it matters what rider they put on it. And I don't think that, like, if that final press release that he is leaving does not open the eyes in HRC, they might as well pull out of the sport, because nothing will.
No.
Because they failed to hire any European talent as far as development on the bike, and they swapped the person who already helped develop this bike in as overall technical director. They didn't bring in any outside ideology. They didn't change.
No.
And if HRC does not change, they will not return to the forefront of the sport.
No.
The game has changed. The game changed back in 2015 when we started seeing wings bursting out of the fairing of the Desmos Adichie. And Andrea Iannone was killing seagulls and riding like a madman around Phillip Island. That
Absolutely.
was the start. It just took this long to finally break.
We've seen it. We've said it on this show numerous times. Ducati has been the only factory that's committed to moving the needle and moving the direction of development in this sport, and they're responsible for the reason why we're here. Why the sport is at this inflection point where Ducati now completely dominates this sport, and anyone that's not on a Ducati can only do so much. Brad Binder, for example, Jack Miller, for example, Aleix Spargaro, Maverick Vinales. These are the best non-Dukes in the field, but they're not competitive.
But at that same time, now it's all 3 European factories. It's Ducati bringing everything. It's Aprilia showing up with ground effect fairings. It's KTM showing up with carbon fiber frames. The game has changed. All 3 of the European manufacturers now have something to hang their hat on. A real development direction to take their bikes to try and one-up each other. Ducati were the first, and they're still riding that wave, and they probably will for the foreseeable future. Honda have brought 2 new aero packages in the past season. It really hasn't changed much. Their 2024 prototype was a dud. And Yamaha, I can smell them from here. Because you've got Fabio Quartararo and Cal Crutchlow saying opposite things about the bike. Fabio's screaming for more power. They gave him more power. It ruined everything else about the bike. Cal's yelling at them, turn down the power and turn down the aero because all the basics are wrong.
Yeah.
And they're both working in the... Like, both Japanese factories seem to be... They're bolting things to their existing bike rather than starting from the ground up. Ducati had to start from the ground up back in 2015.
Yeah. You look at the difference between... I think
it worked.
Yeah, looking at that difference, like, they took the early pain of dumping their GP14. I remember that GP14. It was a boat. It was a big, chunky, uncompetitive for the most part boat that only excelled when it got wet, that mitigated its problems. Like, the GP15 was immediately a far better bike with far more potential than anything that had come before it.
Dre, remember the lap in 2015 at Coda?
Oh, yeah.
Who did Marquez have to beat on that lap?
Andrea Dovizioso. I remember it to this day.
on that GP15. That's before it began sprouting the wings.
Yeah.
So it's been a long con. But now the Japanese manufacturers, and you know what? Suzuki had it right, and it is a crying shame that they left, because they were the only ones to really get their act together as far as this new era of chassis development. And then they bailed.
Yeah.
The other two have to change or continue rotting at the back. Because that 4 of the 5 that Ducati now have, the one left is Fabio Quartararo. And he's stuck at Yamaha for at least another year.
Yep. It's going to be a very interesting 2024 off-season, because Bagnaia is a free agent, Bastianini's a free agent, Quartararo is a free agent. Technically, Marc Marquez apparently will be a free agent because he's only signed a 1-year deal with Gresini. This is essentially a rental. But there's big rumors that KTM will open up a can with Red Bull backing to try and bring him to KTM for 2025. We've got Pedro Acosta on the way in. You know, as a small note, he's replacing Pol Espargaro next year. So, wow, that was an eyebrow raiser.
I can't say I'm shocked.
Yeah.
But it still feels like, because Paul is one of the elder statesmen. And I don't know if there's a place for him in the new MotoGP.
It's wild. It's all wild. I mean, it's... I'm going to try and put a neat little bow on this as best I can and just say that this is... I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be able to call some of the people in the MotoGP Media Center and paddock friends. They've said to me, and like you know me, I work for the race. I've made it quite clear. WTF1 is owned by the race. I'm very lucky to be able to work with them, and I will tell you for free, this was the biggest story they've ever covered in MotoGP in terms of traction, in terms of hit rate, and in terms of how much content they've produced regarding it. Bigger than Valentino Rossi's retirement, which kind of says it all. This was the biggest MotoGP story of modern times, and
the rider that defined the last decade has left home.
The ramifications of this will be felt throughout the sport and beyond. For Marc Marquez, personally, it's freedom. It's freedom from a bike that has given him its greatest success, but also taken the last 4 years of his career away. For Honda, it's the final consequence of their own incompetence for the last half decade plus. And they will feel this pain for a long time while they try to rebuild themselves as a factory. At least I hope they will try to do that. For Gresini, they've hit the jackpot. They're going to have the Marquez brothers in the same house. Marc Marquez will be, in my opinion, an immediate title contender at worst going into this situation on a competitive machine, and it's going to be a marketer's wet dream to have them in the same team together.
I mean, open discussions with MotoGP journalists between them and Ducati engineers. Some of those engineers are salivating at the prospect of Marquez on them because they know the data better than any of us watching can.
Right.
And I quote, "If Marquez gets on a Ducati, the rest of the field won't see which way he went."
Frankie Carchecki, who is Johan Mir's crew chief, also said that too. They said
that's who I'm referencing.
Yeah. That's exactly what he said. He said they ain't got a chance. And that man managed and was crew chief for a world champion in Johan Mir. He knows exactly what he's talking about. And the grid knows what they're dealing with here. The sport just won. Like, the sport got a huge dub out of this. And like I said, the ramifications of this will be felt for a long, long time. This was a massive story. It's the end of an era. The alien era, I think, as we know it, is dead. Like, this was the final curtain call for that era. Welcome to the
end
era.
Of the old era. The rule of the Japanese manufacturer has ended emphatically.
It's been slain
with a thud.
Yeah, it's slain. Ducati will win the manufacturers' championship for the third year in a row. They will almost certainly win the team's title as well. The only thing stopping them is actually the fact that their second bike has not been competitive for most of the season, unfortunately, due to Bastianini's injuries.
Yeah, Premac on the current, with utilizing the current bike, they will almost certainly win the team's championship at a canter.
Yeah.
And we're looking at a probable, it depends on Bezecchi's health. Again, just had a training crash, but they're probably looking at a podium lockout in the Riders' Championship.
Exactly.
Of some order of Pecco, Martin, and Bezecchi.
Exactly. More on that towards the end of the show. But we got to talk a little bit about the Japanese Grand Prix we had a week ago as well. It was a very...
Some of it.
I mean, we got half a Grand Prix here. I mean, it was a dominant, if shortened, weekend by Jorge Martin. He comfortably won the sprint race, which was in the dry. And then in the Grand Prix, well, we had a very interesting situation where it started to rain just as the formation lap was about to start. It was very similar to Assen a few years ago. Maybe not quite as quick with the rainfall, but we had a situation where...
3 or 4 laps, really.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 laps in, it really starts to come down to the point where the slick tire is unusable. And we had pretty much every leading bike on the grid go in for a bike change, flag to flag rules, because we had the white flag come out on the warm-up lap to say, yeah, this is officially a flag to flag race. You can change bikes if necessary. And the rain came down and they switched bikes early. Jorge Martin went wide early on, but was able to recover from 7th, got back to the front of the field quite quickly. And then the rain really started to come down. It became thunderstorm level conditions. Marc Marquez was running third at the time, and it says a lot when Marc Marquez puts his hand up to say, race direction, that's enough. Basically,
it took once it really started coming down. It was another, I'd say, 2 laps, but conditions just continued to deteriorate until it was. I think they called it on the correct lap.
About 13.
It was just too much, much rain, because I mean, we've talked about with these bikes. If these bikes are on enough of a knife edge in the dry. We started seeing a couple people go down. Specifically, Johan Zarco went down.
Massive wreck.
Gigantic crash. Sadly, fell short of one of our favorites here. With the ruling that meant that he could not take the then aborted restart.
Yeah, it was. So here's the situation. They red flagged it on lap 13. Remember that. It becomes important later. Now, they red flagged it on lap 13. Marc Marquez sees a bolt of lightning in the background and was like, nah, that's enough. And race direction promptly agreed. Red flagged the race. Now, this was originally meant to be a 25-lap race. Again, this is important, I promise. Now, as a result, our old friend the Mahias rule came back to rear its ugly head. Remember that?
Did that back up like The Undertaker?
Yes. He was also back on NXT last night. Yeah, as you do. Like the Mahias rule gets in. Johan Zarco had to try and get a mostly dead Pramac back to the pits within 5 minutes of the red flag being declared. He made it. Just one problem. He took a shortcut and didn't enter via the pits to get back to the garage. We think. MotoGP has not released an official statement as to why Johan Zarco was not eligible to take the restart. Hence, you may have seen some jokes on Twitter regarding, quote, free Zarco, because no one exactly knows why he was disqualified from the restart of the race. ... Not that it mattered, because when they tried said restart about half an hour later, the conditions had not improved. They put everybody out for a formation lap, and multiple riders, including Marc Marquez and Fabio Quartararo, about halfway around, raised their hands again and said, you know what, no, that's enough. This is too dangerous to restart. MotoGP was like, yep, we agree. We're aborting the restart.
At that point, they were out of light. Really, yeah. I mean, and the cameras always actually help the light situation for us a little bit.
Yes, of course.
It was practically night there with the sheer amount of rain coming down.
Yeah,
it just would not have been safe to continue.
Exactly. For those who don't know, to appease the European audience a little bit, because let's not forget, Dorna is a Spanish company. Motegi takes place at 3 p.m. local time. the sun normally is down by 6. So roughly around that time of year in Japan. So you've only got about 3 hours of sunlight to play with. If it gets dark via rain or just generally sunset, and if you have delays, you're in trouble because you've only got about 3 hours of sunlight to play with. Mateki does not have floodlights like that because the floodlights will cause dew on the track. You can't race in that sort of condition. It's too dangerous in the first place. So you can't just race at night, for example. So the restart got aborted. And MotoGP was like, well, they're saying the weather says it's not going to improve for like 3 or 4 hours. We're going to call it, basically. We're going to call it right here and now. And because they had literally done just enough, they did 12 laps out of 24, the 50% race distance threshold, it was called, declared a result, full points awarded. Jorge Martin wins the Japanese Grand Prix ahead of Francesco Bagnaia and Marc Marquez with what could be his 101st and final podium for Honda. On brand as ever.
Very romantic, in his own words.
A romantic, potentially final podium for Marc Marquez in Honda colours. But like, I do find it funny, and Gavin Emmett pointed this out on Twitter, that Saturday we raced for half points, and on Sunday we raced the exact same number of laps for full points. It's kind of amazing how that turns out in the end. Don't get us wrong, I believe we're both in complete agreement. It was absolutely the right call to call it when they did.
I mean, and the shame is that like the conditions had improved during the red flag. They put them out there and just the ocean began falling on the, I believe it was the north side of the track. And before they even got back around, it's like, okay, it has to go.
Yeah. They were just like, no, like if the riders raise their hands, generally speaking, race control will take that as the sign to declare it. Basically, that's always been the tradition in bike racing.
These people hop on 300 horsepower, aluminum and carbon fiber missiles with no protection. If they're saying it's unsafe, it's probably a bad situation.
You call it immediately at that point because we all know that riders will race in just about anything. If they think it's too dangerous, then you take their word for it and you stop. And then they absolutely, in my opinion, made the right decision to stop. Jorge Martin was a missile again. Another
complete control over the weekend.
Complete control of the weekend. Dominated the sprint, won comfortably. Bagnaia. We're at the point where Bagnaia can't afford to take seconds anymore. Like,
he's lost a 66-point lead.
Now, this is not all of his own making, of course. We all know the reasons, the predominant reasons as to why he's lost that 66-point lead. It's not all on him. What I will say, though, is that we buried Fabio Quartararo last year for blowing a 91-point lead last year, and Bagnaia has just repeated history. He's blown a 66-point advantage. It's now only 3 points.
And he doesn't have the equipment excuse.
No. He's on an identical machine to his title rival Jorge Martin, who now, all of a sudden, is arguably favourite now to win the MotoGP World Championship for the first time in the MotoGP era, as we call it, on a satellite machine.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, is that Bagnaia hasn't been bad. I mean, he's still racking up podiums. He's still one of the fastest riders in the field. But what Martin has done is he's taken the raw speed that has never been his problem, and he's not dropping the bike anymore. And he looks to be in complete rhythm right now. Podiums and second places and third place are all well good enough for Bagnaia, but not when Martin is doing weekend sweeps.
Yeah. Martin's won the last 3 sprint races, and he's gone third, first, second, first in the last 4 races. It's between these two. Yeah, he is
because Bezecchi's probably. I mean, he's 54 points out, and now he's riding with a significant injury, if he's riding at all.
Yeah, for those who missed the news, Marco Bezecchi earlier this week had a training crash at the ranch, and he has broken a collarbone. He had surgery the next day to fix it. He is flying to Indonesia this weekend. He's going to attempt to ride on it, but a collarbone injury is significant for a MotoGP rider. I doubt he'll be anywhere near his best. Good luck to him. I mean, the blessing in inverted commas of something like that is that at least with the pain, you can stop when it becomes too great. At least there is that. The same thing happened to Alex Rins when he attempted to ride in Japan, because this was his first weekend back, and he pulled out after free practice because the pain was too much in his leg. He couldn't continue. So, you know, it's a nasty situation. I mean, I feel sorry for Bez. I mean, Bez has had a fantastic season and deserves all the credit in the world.
Breakout star of the year, without a question. No
question. He's been phenomenal this season, and that's a real shame that his title campaign is likely over as a direct result of that injury, because that's the way this sport's been all year. It's been utterly ruthless in that regard. We still haven't had a Grand Prix this year with a fully healthy grid.
I've given up on that prospect. We're not getting one this year because, I mean, Rins, it's debatable whether he is going, because, I mean, that pain in his leg is not going to go away anytime soon. Marini, out. Alex Marquez, still out. I mean, one of the Hondas is launching someone up into heaven every 2 weekends. Just depends on who it is. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, Ducati's now got 5 hurt riders.
They've actually got a genuine replacement rider crisis on their hands, because
Pirro got hurt.
Michele Pirro got injured in the Italian Superbike Championship decider this past weekend because he was absolutely speared by another rider at Imola and injured himself as a direct result of that crash. So Ducati's in a genuine pickle here as to who they can get. What I'm saying is they better have Alvaro Bautista's number on standby, because they're likely going to have to use it, because luckily for them, World Superbikes is not back for another 3 weeks.
That won Pirro's opposition the title because the other rider was on a Ducati. That's how he beat Pirro for the title in that championship.
As you do. And they were beefing with each other on a live stream on YouTube days afterwards. Italian motorsport is weird, everybody. Like, just take my word for it on this one. The big thing I've taken away from
riders, man.
We are. Like, holy shit. One big thing I'll take away from this weekend is that Jorge Martin is now probably favourite for this championship. Francesco Bagnaia can no longer rest on his laurels. He cannot just take the points and think about the next race. He now has to go at 100% to beat Martin, because Martin is in impervious form at the moment.
We know what happens as well to both of these riders when they push at 100%. They're both mistake prone at the limit. Yeah,
and for the most part, they've rectified most of that error. They like Bagnaia had India as a genuine blip. We don't quite know what happened in Catalonia. I don't think that was on him.
That looked like a textbook traction control failure.
It did.
I mean, with the Ducatis, I mean, there's a reason why the joke on this show is death taxes Ducati tucks the front. Very rarely are you going to have a high side crash.
Correct. And so, you know, it's not all on Bagnaia. Of course it isn't. But the reality is he's lost his advantage. This is now a 6-race championship between him and Martin. It's effectively a straight shootout for 6 races now, including the 6 sprints. It's now a straight shootout between them for the title. And
let's just roll down the list here. I mean, Bastianini, still broken ankle. Still broken hand.
We'll try to race this weekend on it.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck to him.
Last I checked, he was still in a cast for that broken ankle.
Oh, yeah.
Alex Marquez, broken ribs. Mm-hmm. Luca Marini, broken collarbone at the start of the sprint. And now Bezzecchi. And Pirro in an unrelated series crash. It's down to these two. Two of the fastest mistake-prone riders having to ride at 100% on equal machinery.
Yeah. Two of the
highest...
Who
do you pick in this situation?
God knows. Like, these are two of the most high-risk, high-reward riders we've ever seen in this sport. And that's a sport that's had Marc Marquez in it for some time.
He's going to be on one of these things next year.
Might as well play Monopoly with 3 dice now then. Okay, fine. But this is ridiculous. This is a crazy title fight. This is going to go down to the wire, I think, because right now their strengths and weaknesses are virtually identical. Bagnaia seemingly has a genuine problem with his brakes and his braking, normally his killer attribute as a rider, which is going to be fascinating. And we've never seen Jorge Martin in this scenario. He's got to fight for a championship now. This is uncharted territory for a rider of his ability. We know he's fast. He's always been breakneck fast. But can he handle the pressure? We just don't know.
Well, and in Japan, I mean, he had plenty of opportunities to throw it all away.
He nearly did.
Almost did. And yet, he was able to not only recover from that and stay in the race, but also go run down everyone from him, including Bagnaia, and then ride away from him.
Right.
So, I just don't... We're in uncharted territory with all protagonists. More COVID.
More COVID.
And then... I mean, how's Ducati going to approach this?
I don't know. I mean,
I almost wonder with Bagnaia and his brakes. Because Ducati has done continuous development, I almost wonder if they've overspiced it.
Maybe,
because we know they made a major change to their launch and their basically their whole shot device a couple of races ago. I legitimately wonder if they're trying too much.
It's like you've already got the dominant bike in the field. You've already got all the quality talent on said bikes that you could ever wish to have. Even last year's bike with Marco Bezzecchi has proven to be, again, genuinely competitive like it was with Bastianini last year. You don't need to do what you're doing. It's like that Seattle Mariners clip. Ken Griffey Jr. can only be great. And maybe you're flying too close to the sun with this because you have Francesco Bagnaia, who, don't get me wrong, is an incredible bike rider, an incredible talent, but we also know he's very fragile. It doesn't take much for him to make mistakes. Yes, he won the world title last year, but no one has ever won a world title being as much as a wrecking ball as he has been.
Well, and that was up against, and we know the situation. We know the state of play right now. Fabio Quartararo was beyond his own limits to mitigate a bike that we know is now debatably the slowest one in the field. It didn't become the slowest one overnight. It's just that there was nothing left to give. And then Fabio started making mistakes creeping in. Neither of these guys have any margin for error anymore.
Right. And that's what's going to make the back end of this title fight, which, like I said, is now a 6-round shootout by all accounts. It's going to be a fascinating run-in because let's not forget as well, these next 6 races are going to be taking place over 7 weeks. This is a triple header we're about to run into with Indonesia, Phillip Island, and then Thailand. They take a week off, and then it's Malaysia, Qatar, Valencia to close out the year. It's 7 weeks. There's one thing that's also mentioned. If somebody gets hurt now, your season is over. If you take a major injury now, your championship is done. So there is so little margin for error here. You've now this is going to be this is the real shit now. This is going to be the relentless run to close out the year that we all feared this going into this season. This is it. We have 6 rounds in 7 weeks to close out this season. God knows what's going to happen between now and November by the time we get to Valencia, because anything, and I do mean anything, could happen, and that's what will make it so fascinating. Like I said, next week, Indonesia, the first of 6 rounds in 7 weeks. We will see how this plays out, because if it's anything like last year, good Lord Almighty, who knows what could happen? We'll have to call forth the rain shaman again. Who knows? We'll have to...
There's a very realistic possibility that both of us got our preseason bet wrong.
Who'd have thunk it? We might have to buy each other a diecast.
No one wins.
Go Pecco! Bring me my diecast. If not, we're gonna have to buy each other a diecast.
Mark on the Ducati early?
every little helps. But we'll get to Indonesia next week. Again, places you can find us. We're on Instagram, Motorsport 101 Pod. We're on Twitter at Dre_WTF1, at CBuckley917, at Motorsport_101. Our website, motorsport101.com. Look out for next week. Because I will be talking at length about the Marquez departure on top of the standard race review. So look forward to that. And of course, if you really like us, you can back us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Motorsport101. Be there for it. If you want to back us financially, you can listen to these shows live as they're being recorded at $10 level, early access to episodes when they're completed as well. All of that good stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. We'll be back for the Indonesian Grand Prix next week. But until then, I've been Dre Harrison. He's been Cam Buckley. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Sayonara.
Free! I'm free!
He sounds like a biking version of Rita Repulsa. After 10,000 years, I'm free. It's time to conquer Ducati.